The house on Deer Street in Coral Springs was 37 years old, the same age as my son Thomas. This coincidence had always seemed like a special sign to me. I had purchased the house a month after his birth, as if promising the new man a solid foundation on which to build his life. Now sitting on the porch and watching a leisurely Florida sunset, I chuckle at these naive thoughts of the young father I once was. My name is Randall Holt, 76 years old, retired former federal judge, a widower, unless you count a divorce from 20 years ago as a form of widowhood, father of one son, grandfather of 0 grandchildren, owner of this 2-story house with 4 bedrooms, a spacious living room, and a backyard where I grow orange trees. The only creatures that patiently listen to my monologues. Tonight I'm expecting guests. Thomas and his wife Wendy come about once every 3 months, usually on Sundays. They spend exactly 2 hours and 45 minutes here. Not a minute more. Timekeeping of judicial precision. I know Thomas would prefer not to come at all, but the sense of duty I've instilled in him over the years keeps him from giving up the visits altogether. I rise from the wicker chair, leaning on my cane, not so much out of necessity as out of respect for my age. At 76, you're supposed to have a mahogany cane with a silver head. It lends weight to my words when I occasionally visit the law club or meet with former colleagues. The inside of the house is cool thanks to the air conditioner running on minimum power. I conserve electricity, although my pension as a federal judge allows me not to think about such trivialities. An old habit that saves my conscience rather than money. The living room looks as if it had been selected by a museum curator. Leather sofas with scuffs in all the right places, dark wood bookcases filled with legal volumes and classic literature, lamps with ivory-colored shades. On the walls are framed photographs chronicling my career, handshakes with 2 presidents, award ceremonies, celebrations. Thomas is present at only 3 of them: high school graduation, college graduation, my wedding to Wendy. In all 3 photos, there is a noticeable distance between us, the physical embodiment of the gulf that has grown over the years. The doorbell rings at 5 p.m. sharp. Thomas is always punctual, another quality I've invested in him that is now turned against me in the form of strictly timed socializing. Shimonorum. Hello, Father, Thomas says as he crosses the threshold. He is tall, slender, with the same straight nose and high forehead that I have, but with his mother's eyes brown, with a question lurking in them. Today he's dressed in a light blue shirt and dark blue pants, the simple but neat Sunday outfit of a digital security specialist, a job I never fully understood, though I pretended to appreciate his professional choices. Good evening, Thomas, I nod, accepting his mechanical embrace. Wendy, it's good to see you. My sister-in-law smiles her professional public relations smile, the perfect curve of her lips without affecting her eyes. Wendy never calls me Daddy, only Randall, and I appreciate this honesty in our relationship. How's your health? Thomas asks, walking into the living room, the standard question that opens our conversation. Surprisingly good for a man of my age, I answer in my usual phrase. Dr. Brown says my heart works like a 50-year-old's. That's true. I've always taken care of my health, didn't drink, didn't smoke, took daily walks around the neighborhood. Maybe that's why they still come around, to see if I'm finally going to cede my place in the sun to a younger generation. Thomas takes a seat in the chair, Wendy on the couch next to him. I take my usual seat across from him. Our ritualized conversation begins. Is everything okay at work? I ask, even though I already know the answer. Yes, the new project is going well. We're implementing a security system for the banking network, Thomas says, looking at his watch. The first glance at the clock is usually 10 minutes after the start of the visit. What about you, Wendy? Is your firm still working with that politician? Not anymore, she replies, fixing her perfectly styled blonde hair. We finalized the contract 2 months ago. Now I'm consulting for a chain of medical clinics. I nod with an interested look. What follows is an exchange of news about the weather, the political situation. Superficially, we've been avoiding this topic for a long time. And a new restaurant that opened in their neighborhood. After about 40 minutes of such conversation, Thomas offers to make tea, which gives him an excuse to retire to the kitchen and take a breather from talking to me. I'll help, Wendy says, following him. I'm alone in the living room. listening to their muffled voices from the kitchen. My hearing has always been excellent, another benefit of a healthy lifestyle. Usually they're discussing what groceries I need to buy or what bills I need to check, the duty of caring for my aging father. But today I pick up something unusual in Wendy's tone. The realtor says the neighborhood is in high demand, comes her muffled voice. A house like this will go fast, especially if you lower the price a little. I freeze, listening more closely. But the deeds, Thomas's voice sounds concerned. Honey, you have power of attorney to administer his estate in the event of incapacity, remember? We can use the opinion from Dr. Higgins. He's already agreed. The blood is rushing to my temples. Dr. Higgins is not my primary care physician. He's the neurologist Thomas insisted I see a few months ago for preventative care. I declined. What if he finds out? Thomas asks. I hear Wendy laugh softly. In what way? He hardly ever leaves the house except for his walks along the same route. His friends are long gone or dead. We'll just say we had to sell the house in a hurry because he needs special care. He'll even thank us when he lives at Sunny Acres, which has excellent senior care. Sunny Acres is a medium-sized nursing home about 30 miles from here. I once visited my former secretary there, a place where old people live out their days to the sound of TV shows and the smell of medicine. We don't have a choice, Tom, Wendy continued. You know where we are after that project. It's either your father's house or our house. What's it going to be? There's silence. I imagine my son standing with his head down, torn between the remnants of filial duty and the pressures of his wife. But I know him too well. Has the realtor found a buyer yet? He finally asks. And I realize from his tone that the decision has been made. Yes, Wendy's voice sounds pleased. He's ready to meet next Sunday. A very respectable man, by the way. And he's coming in a Rolls Royce. Can you believe it? To this old house. A white Rolls Royce, Thomas clarifies. Yes, he mentioned that the car is white. What's the difference? The main thing is that he has the money and he's ready to pay right away. We'll meet him here, show him the house. Your father's usually out on his Sunday walk at this time. The sound of running water drowns out their further conversation. I sit frozen in my chair, gripping the armrests so white my knuckles turn white. 37 years in this house. 37 years of memories, including the years growing up here with the very son who now plans to toss me to the curb of life. By the time they return with a tray of teacups and cookies, I am in complete control of my face. My years in judging have taught me how to hide my emotions. I smile and accept the cup from Thomas's hands. Thank you, son. How lucky I am to have you, I say, sipping the hot tea and looking over the cup at their faces. I don't know what I'd do without you. Wendy smiles, pleased with how their plan is going. Thomas averts his eyes for a moment, but quickly puts the mask of a caring son back on his face. You're welcome, Father. We'll always be there for you. He utters a phrase I now know the true value of. They leave in exactly 2 hours and 45 minutes, as usual. I wave to them from the doorway, leaning on my cane harder than necessary, creating the image of a frail old man. As their car disappears around the corner, I straighten up and walk back into the house. My mind is already at work, analyzing what I've heard and forming a plan of action. So, a white Rolls Royce. Next Sunday. Mystery wealthy buyer. I wonder what they'd say if they knew it was me. I go to the phone. I have a few calls to make. Fortunately, despite my age, my connections are still strong. And while many of my friends have indeed passed away, as my astute sister-in-law has pointed out, some still hold influential positions and would be happy to do the old judge a favor. I dial the first number, feeling a cold resolve growing inside. Well, Thomas and Wendy will soon learn that you can't teach an old dog new tricks. But an old dog can teach a few lessons to young pups, especially if they've forgotten to honor the pack leader. Sleep didn't come to me that night. I lay in my bed, listening to the ticking of the antique floor clock in the hallway, a trusted companion to my sleepless nights for 30 years. Tick-tock. Each beat of the second hand echoed in me with a wave of anger, followed by bitterness and frustration. Tick-tock. How had we gotten to the point where my only son was planning to sell the roof over my head as if I were already dead, or worse, a voiceless old man incapable of controlling his own destiny? At 3 in the morning, I got out of bed. I threw on a robe and went down to my office, the room that had been the sanctuary of my work as a judge for 30 years. I turned on the desk lamp and pulled out a drawer of photo albums, yellowed pages, faded snapshots, a chronicle of a life that now seemed foreign. Here's Thomas at age 5 sitting on my lap. I have a smile on my face, but my eyes are tired. At the time, I was working 16 hours a day on a complex corruption case in the city council. I remember that after this picture, I went straight to the office, leaving my son with his mother. Documents, testimony, precedents were waiting for me. Justice could not wait. Flipping through the pages, Thomas is 10, his birthday, a bowling party with his classmates. I'm in the picture, but I'm standing off to the side, talking on the phone. I remember this moment. The ADA called about the appeal. I talked to him for 20 minutes and missed my son striking out his first strike. Thomas's 12th birthday was a blank page. I was at an important trial in another state, brought him a gift of a model airplane that he put on a shelf and never touched. High school graduation. Thomas and Piper, his mother, smile for the camera. I stand next to them with a strained smile. By then, our marriage was a mere formality. Piper couldn't stand living with a man who was married to his job. "You're a judge even in our bedroom, Randall," she told me on the eve of our divorce. "You pass sentences, but you never listen to the defense." I slammed the album shut. Why the sentiment? I was a good judge and a bad father, a truth I'd long ago admitted to myself. But does that justify betrayal? Didn't my son get an excellent education with my money? Didn't I give him a head start in life that allowed him to have a good career? Didn't I once deny him financial help when he came for it? I walked to the bar and poured myself a glass of water. I'd given up alcohol 25 years ago after drunkenly making an erroneous judgment, which thankfully was corrected on appeal. Standing at the window, I stared out at the dark street, remembering another conversation I'd had with Piper a month before our divorce. "You're raising him to be a defendant, Randall," she'd said then, standing in the same living room where Thomas and Wendy had sat yesterday. "He fears you, but he doesn't respect you. One day he'll hate you for this perpetual criticism, for never showing him you love him." I waved her words away. I don't want to raise a spoiled child who thinks the world owes him something just because his daddy is a federal judge. Toughness now is kindness in the long run. Piper only shook her head. "No, Randall, it's just toughness, and it will boomerang back to you one day." My ex-wife's words echoed in my head. Was she really right? Had that boomerang come back to me in the form of a conspiracy to sell my house? I remembered how Thomas had suggested a month ago that I sign a power of attorney to manage the property, just in case. "It's just a formality, Father. If something happens to you, I won't have to go through the courts to help you." I signed without even reading the text. Trust in my son? No, just the arrogance of a man used to thinking he was invulnerable. I went back to my desk and turned on my computer, one of the few concessions to modernity in my house. I didn't use the internet as skillfully as the youngsters, but enough to find the information I needed. "Power of attorney for estate administration revocation," I typed into the search box. The first results showed that I could revoke the power of attorney at any time by drawing up the appropriate document with a notary. That's what I'll do first. The next query was white Rolls-Royce rental Coral Springs. Several companies offered luxury car rentals for weddings and special occasions. I made notes. Then I opened my bank statement. There was plenty of money in the accounts. Federal judges get a nice pension, and I've always been frugal. But my plan would require additional resources. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't dialed in years. "Arthur Price speaking," came a gruff voice after the fourth ring. My former colleague, now a partner in a large law firm, had never slept well. "Arthur, it's Randall Holt. I'm sorry to call you so early." "Rand?" He sounded surprised. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" "I'm fine, but I need your help. It's a delicate matter." "I'm listening." I summarized the situation, skipping the emotional part and focusing on the facts as I always did when I was a judge. "Ungrateful, bloody children," Arthur grumbled when I was done. "What can I do for you?" "I need a reliable realtor to play along and represent me as the buyer of the house, and I need to revoke the power of attorney without my son finding out right away." "The power of attorney is no problem. I'll send my notary to you today. And as for the realtor, he's been thinking." My niece Saoirse works in that field. You can trust her. Thank you, Arthur. Don't thank me. I still remember how you stood by me when my daughter got caught up in that drug thing. If it hadn't been for you. It's in the past, I cut him off. I don't like reminders of the good old days. They create the illusion that your current actions matter less. After talking to Arthur, I called my banker, then the manager of the car rental company, waking him up and apologizing for the early call. By 7 in the morning, the major calls were made, and the plan began to take shape. At 8 in the morning, a call from Arthur went out. The notary will be at my place at 10, and at 11, his niece Saoirse would arrive to discuss the details of the real estate transaction. She's a bright girl, Arthur assured me, and she has a grudge against ungrateful children too. Her husband is suing for the right to see his daughter. The day flew by in a flurry of activity. The notary, a full and sweating man in his 40s, drew up a revocation of the power of attorney with a note that the document would take effect in 10 days, enough time for my plan to take effect. Saoirse was an energetic woman in her 30s with a short haircut and a keen eye. She quickly grasped the gist of the plan and suggested a few improvements. "Shusikimum. We need to make it look as believable as possible," she said, making notes in her notebook. "I'll act as the buyer's representative. We'll set up a meeting for 3 o'clock next Sunday afternoon. I'll drive up first, and you'll drive up in a Rolls-Royce half an hour later. Let them worry about waiting." "What if they recognize me?" I asked. "Even in a Rolls-Royce, I'm still an old man with a distinctive appearance." Saoirse grinned. "Don't worry, I know a great makeup artist. He works with a local theater and can make you unrecognizable. A small change, but effective." "Makeup?" I cringed. "Isn't that a little too theatrical?" "This whole situation is theatrical, Mr. Holt," said Saoirse. "If you're going to put on a show, you should do it professionally." There was truth in what she said. I agreed to do the makeup. Then we discussed the technical details. Saoirse had to make sure that Thomas and Wendy didn't contact the real estate firm through which they planned to sell the house. My plan could only work if the con artists were completely isolated. I could use my connections to discreetly find out which firm they were working with, Saoirse suggested, and then organize a little misunderstanding so that their real realtor can't attend the meeting. "I don't want innocent people to get hurt," I warned, still thinking in terms of the law, even as I planned a little revenge. "It's not a big deal, just a mix-up or an emergency," Saoirse assured me. "No one will get hurt." After Saoirse left, I felt tired. The sleepless night and the emotional strain were taking their toll. I lay down for a nap, but I couldn't sleep. My mind was reeling with fragments of memories. Thomas, at the age of 16, bursting into my office. "You promised to come to my game. It was finals and you were gone again." I tear myself away from the papers. "People's fates are being decided in my office right now, Thomas. It's time for you to realize that there are more important things than high school soccer." The door slams. A week of silence. Thomas, at 21, comes home from college. "I met a girl, Dad. Her name is Wendy." The first time he's called me Dad in years. "She's studying public relations. I think she's the one." I nod, immersed in reading a law journal. "Okay, son. The important thing is that she doesn't interfere with your career." Thomas's wedding. Wendy in a white dress, radiant, beautiful. Thomas, nervous and proud. I give a prepared toast on the value of family, quoting ancient philosophers. The guests applaud. Later, Piper, sitting at another table with her new husband, casts me a look full of regret. "You never learned to speak from the heart," she whispers as she walks by. The day Thomas informs me that he and Wendy have decided not to have children. "The modern world is too unstable," he explained. I nodded, hiding my disappointment. How many times had I imagined being a better grandfather than I had been a father? How I'd right my wrongs with the next generation. But I had no right to judge their decision. Too many of my own mistakes were weighing on me. I got out of bed, realizing that sleep would not come. It was 4 in the afternoon. I went downstairs, brewed a strong cup of coffee, and sat down at my desk with a notebook. It was time to schedule my plan of action by day, a habit developed by years of court scheduling. Monday, finalize revocation of power of attorney, check his registration. Tuesday, meet with makeup artist to test image. Wednesday, confirm the Rolls-Royce lease, do a test drive to make sure I'm confident driving this big car. Thursday, Meeting with Saoirse to finalize details. Friday, preparing a scripted conversation. What exactly will I say to Thomas and Wendy in a moment of exposure? Question. How far am I willing to go? Do I just want to teach them a lesson, or do I intend to sever the relationship completely? Which is more important, restoring justice or preserving family ties, however fragile they may be? I sip my coffee, feeling the bitterness on my tongue. Justice had always been my guiding light. But what was justice in family relationships? Looking out the window at my manicured garden, I thought about the seeds of alienation I'd sown years ago when I'd chosen work over my son time after time. Now I was reaping the harvest, but betrayal was still betrayal. And if my son and his wife decided they could control my life and property behind my back, then they should be prepared to face the consequences. I reread my plan and added one last item. Saturday, prepare the paperwork to amend the will. If I was going to cut ties, I had to do it thoroughly. Sunday morning was unusually clear, as if nature itself had decided to witness the upcoming performance. I woke up at 6 in the morning, though I usually let myself sleep until 8 on weekends. Today was a special day, the day my son and his wife were to receive a lesson they would not soon forget. I shaved thoroughly, being careful not to hurt myself. My hands were trembling slightly, not from old age, but from anticipation. Then I showered using sandalwood-scented aftershave, my constant choice for the past 30 years. Getting dressed, I stopped in front of the closet, pondering what to wear. Usually on Sunday, I went out for a walk in simple pants and an unbuttoned shirt. Today's outfit had to fit my usual routine so as not to arouse suspicion if Thomas and Wendy arrived early. At 7:30, I had breakfast of oatmeal with blueberries and a cup of strong black coffee. At 8, my makeup artist, Lloyd, a short man with pale skin and nimble fingers whom Saoirse had brought in, arrived. We set up in the upstairs bathroom, which was well lit. "Don't worry, Mr. Holt," Lloyd said, laying out his tools. "We won't make you look any different. Just a slight change in your facial features and a few details that will draw attention away from the features by which you might be recognized." He worked quickly and carefully. First, he applied the base, then added wrinkles in other places, changed my eyebrow line slightly, and attached small pads to my cheekbones, changing the oval of my face. Then he put a gray wig on me, differing from my natural gray in shade and style of hair. To finish, he added a thin mustache, a detail I'd never worn. And now the glasses. He handed me a frame with simple glasses. They changed the whole face. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. In front of me was a respectable elderly gentleman, reminiscent of a professor or a diplomat. Anyone but me. At least not the me Thomas knew. "Impressive," I said, studying the new face. "Do you think my own son won't recognize me?" "People see what they expect to see," Lloyd said philosophically. "Your son is expecting an old rich man in a white Rolls Royce. He'll see a rich old man in a white Rolls Royce. Plus, you'll be wearing dark glasses, which will further obscure your eyes." After the makeup artist left, I changed into a gray suit I had purchased especially for the occasion. The suit was expensive, but not flashy, with a vest and a silk handkerchief in the breast pocket, the image of a successful elderly gentleman. At 9:30, a driver from the car rental company arrived in his car to take me to the place where the Rolls-Royce was waiting for me. We had agreed in advance that the driver would deliver the car to a shopping center 3 blocks from my house. There I would get into the Rolls-Royce and drive myself to the house. The Rolls-Royce Phantom was impressive, snow white, with chrome parts shining in the sun, cream leather interior, walnut wood inlays, a dashboard reminiscent of an airplane cockpit. I sat behind the wheel and felt a little uncomfortable. The last time I'd driven a car of this size was about 20 years ago. "Don't worry, sir," the rental manager said. "It's easier to drive than it looks. Just remember that it's wider than a regular car." I took a few laps around the parking lot, getting used to the controls. To my surprise, the Rolls-Royce actually handled better than I expected. When I felt confident enough, the manager handed me my papers, wished me luck, and left in a cab waiting nearby. It was 11 in the morning. It was 4 hours before the appointment. I stopped by a small cafe in a nearby neighborhood I'd never been to before and ordered a light brunch. Then I called Saoirse to make sure everything was going as planned. "Everything's fine," she reported. I contacted their realtor under the guise of an assistant and told him that the meeting had been rescheduled for tomorrow. He won't be in attendance today. I'll be at your house at 2:30 as agreed. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I parked the Rolls-Royce 2 blocks from my house and waited. I wanted to see Thomas and Wendy arrive, to watch them from afar before I played out the final scene. At 2:15, a familiar silver sedan pulled up. Thomas and Wendy got out of the car and headed for the front door. Both were dressed formally. Thomas in a dark blue suit, Wendy in a beige dress and jacket. They were clearly dressing up to meet a potential buyer. I watched them open the door with their key and go inside. After a few minutes, they came out onto the porch and began to look around the facade, apparently evaluating it through the eyes of a potential buyer. Thomas said something, pointing to the roof and windows. Wendy nodding. At 2:30, Saoirse arrived in her neat black automobile. She was dressed in a strict business suit, briefcase in hand, the epitome of a professional realtor. I watched as she introduced herself to Thomas and Wendy, shook hands, and entered the house. Now I had to wait for my exit. Saoirse and I had agreed that she would text me when she was ready for me to show up. The minutes dragged agonizingly slow. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. The makeup was holding up well. The wig fit naturally. I put on my dark glasses, completing my look. At 3:05 came a text from Saoirse. We're ready. They're nervous about a late customer. I started the Rolls-Royce's engine, and the powerful vehicle silently sprang to life. After driving slowly for 2 blocks, I turned onto my street. My house was visible from afar, a neat 2-story colonial-style mansion with a driveway lined with flowering oleander bushes. 3 figures stood on the porch: Thomas, Wendy, and Saoirse. They were watching a white Rolls-Royce approaching. I saw Wendy fix her hair with a nervous gesture, and Thomas tugged on his jacket. Hopes of a big deal were written all over their faces. I parked smoothly in front of the house and turned off the engine. The moment of truth had arrived. My heart beat more frequently than usual, but my hands were steady as I opened the door and stepped out of the car. Slowly, with the dignity that only comes with age and position, I made my way to the porch. Good afternoon, I said hello, changing my voice slightly, making it deeper and slower. I apologize for being a little late. The traffic in the city is getting worse. That's okay, Wendy replied with the most charming of smiles. We're just glad you could make it. Thomas Holt, my son introduced himself, extending his hand. And this is my wife, Wendy. Nice to meet you. I shook his hand, holding it for a moment longer than usual, studying his face. Not a shadow of recognition, just professional courtesy, and a greedy gleam in his eyes at the sight of my Rolls-Royce. Let's see the house, Saoirse suggested, opening the door. We stepped inside. It felt strange to be a guest in my own home. I pretended to see these rooms for the first time, asking questions about the age of the structure, the heating system, the neighbors. Thomas answered enthusiastically, listing the house's virtues as if he had built it himself. Where does the owner live now? I asked as we looked around the living room. Thomas and Wendy exchanged quick glances. My father, Thomas began, he's at an advanced age. He needs specialized care, so we're looking for a place for him in a good boarding house. Does he know about the sale? I looked at them carefully through my dark glasses. Of course, Wendy answered hastily. He fully supports this decision. It's just that because of his health, he can't participate in the trial. I understand, I nodded. Dementia, I guess. It's hard to see loved ones lose their minds. So, yes, something like that, Thomas said evasively, and I saw the corner of his mouth twitch, a sure sign that he was lying. It was a tic he'd developed as a child when he tried to lie about his homework. We continued our tour of the house. On the second floor, Wendy was proudly showing off the master bedroom, my bedroom, as she painted the benefits of the morning sun falling through the east windows. I noticed that some of my personal belongings had been put away. Photographs, books on the bedside table. They had been prepared for sale in advance. Back on the first floor, we walked to the backyard. My garden of orange trees looked especially attractive on this sunny day. Beautiful property, I said as we walked back to the front door. I'm almost ready to make an offer. But first I'd like to meet the owner in person. I'm an old-fashioned man. I prefer to do business directly. Unfortunately, that's not possible, Wendy said quickly. As we have already explained, he is not in the right state of mind. I understand, I nodded. In that case, I suppose we can finalize the deal here and now. There was a look of ill-concealed relief on their faces. That's fine, Thomas said. We have all the necessary documents. We can... But first, I interrupted him, I'd like to make something clear. I slowly took off my dark glasses and looked directly into my son's eyes. Then I took off the wig and pulled off the mustache in one motion. Didn't expect it? I said in my normal voice. I am the buyer. Thomas and Wendy's faces changed so rapidly that in another situation it might have seemed comical. Shock, disbelief, fear, and shame alternated within seconds. Wendy turned pale, her mouth ajar but made no sound. Thomas froze in place, his face taking on an ashy hue. Father? He finally squeezed out. But how? Why? Why am I here? I finished for him. Because I found out about your little plan to sell my house behind my back. About how you were going to put me away in Sunny Acres like some old junk that was cluttering up the house. Wendy gripped the stair railing. Her knees seemed about to buckle. Mr. Holt, she began in a trembling voice, it's not what I think it is? I interrupted her. What exactly am I supposed to think, Wendy? That you and my son decided to sell the house I've lived in for 37 years without letting me know? That you plan to use a false medical report that I was incapacitated? Thomas took a step forward, his hands shaking. Father, let me explain. We were having financial difficulties. That project I was talking about, it failed. We lost our entire investment. The bank threatened to foreclose on our house. We were desperate. So instead of coming to me and asking for help, you decided to steal from your own father? My voice was quiet, but every word sounded like a whip. We wanted to take care of you, Wendy exclaimed. Her eyes filled with tears, but I knew my sister-in-law well enough to realize those tears were for effect. Sunny Acres is a good place, with medical care. Spare me the hypocrisy, I cut her off. I checked out Sunny Acres. It's a minimum care facility where the basic service is to give pills 3 times a day and change the linens once a week. I turned to Saoirse, who was standing quietly off to the side, watching the drama unfold. Thank you for your help, Miss Price. You played your part admirably. You're welcome, Mr. Holt, she replied with a slight smile and headed for the door. I'll be in the car if you need me. When the door closed behind her, I turned back to Thomas and Wendy. They were standing side by side, instinctively holding on to each other like frightened children caught stealing cookies. Except it wasn't a cookie. It was someone's life. My life. What now? Thomas asked in a hoarse voice. Are you going to sue us? I looked at my son, the only child I'd never been able to truly love the way he deserved. At Wendy, who I'd always thought was too superficial for him, but whom he'd chosen as his life partner. They trembled before me, awaiting judgment, professional or parental. Judgment? I interjected. No, Thomas. A trial is for strangers, and you are my family. As broken and maimed as it is. I paused, watching as a glimmer of hope appeared in their eyes. But don't think there will be no consequences for this act, I continued, and the hope in their eyes faded as quickly as it had appeared. I have already revoked your power of attorney, Thomas. The document has been registered and will take effect in a few days, and I will amend the will. Papa, please, Thomas began, calling me that for the first time in years. We didn't mean to. We just didn't see any other way out. There's always another way, I said. I've taught you that since you were a boy. There is always a legal and honest way to solve problems. What do we do? Wendy looked at me with eyes full of fear. There's nowhere for us to go. I took a deep breath. Despite their betrayal, these people were my family, the only family I had left. We'll talk about it, I said after a pause. Not tonight. I need time to think about it, and you need time to realize what you almost did. I headed for the door, then stopped and turned around. Leave your house keys on the table before you go, I said, and don't try to contact me in the next few days. I'll call you myself when I'm ready to talk. I walked out onto the porch without looking back. Saoirse was waiting in her car. I got into the Rolls-Royce, started the engine, and drove slowly out of the driveway. In the rearview mirror, I saw Thomas and Wendy standing on the porch, staring after me. Their figures seemed small and lost against the backdrop of the house they were trying to sell. I didn't know if I could ever forgive them, didn't know if I could ever trust them again. But one thing I knew for sure was that today I had taught them a lesson they wouldn't forget, and it was probably the best thing I ever did as a father. For 3 days, I didn't leave the house, didn't answer the phone, didn't check my email, didn't answer the front door. Sat in my office watching the sun move across the antique Persian rug, leaving and taking away patches of light like time, taking away moments that would never happen again. The phone rang regularly. The answering machine in the living room was filled with Thomas's voice. "Father, we need to talk. Please pick up the phone. I know you're home. We can explain everything." Once I heard Wendy's voice, more subdued, no note of remorse, just calculated practicality. "Randall, this situation is out of control. Let's sit down like adults and discuss our next steps." Adults. What do we know about adulthood? My son is 37 years old. I am 76. On all formal grounds, we are adults. But inside, we have the same doubts, the same resentments, the same childish desires to be loved and important. Only as the years go by, we hide them better behind masks of responsibility and rationality. On Monday, a letter arrived from Arthur, a dry legal notice that the power of attorney had been successfully revoked. Tuesday came a message from the bank manager confirming a change in the terms of access to my accounts. Wednesday, I finally went for a walk, realizing that my voluntary shuddering was only fueling a drama that had already exhausted itself. The streets of Coral Springs were the same as they always were. Manicured lawns, neat houses, the occasional passerby nodding a greeting. The world didn't stop because of my family tragedy. It kept spinning, indifferent to our microscopic dramas. Walking back home, I saw Thomas's car parked on the opposite side of the street. He was sitting behind the wheel looking at my house. Noticing me, he quickly got out and headed in my direction. I continued walking at my usual pace, neither speeding up nor slowing down. "Father," he began, coming toward me. "Please listen to me." I stopped and looked at him, my only child, a part of my flesh and blood. He looked gaunt, shadows under his eyes, his hair a mess. A light stubble covered his usually perfectly shaven face. Thomas was always careful about his appearance, and this carelessness was a clear indication of his condition. "I'm listening," I said, making no attempt to continue toward the house. What I have done, it's unforgivable," he began, stammering. "But we were desperate. That investment project I told you about had failed. We lost all the money we had invested. The bank was threatening to foreclose on our house. Wendy said that." "Don't put the blame on your wife," I interrupted him. "You're a man. You're my son. You made a decision." Thomas lowered his head. "Yes, you're right. I made a decision, and it was a terrible one. We stood on the sidewalk, two Holts, two generations of the same family, bound by blood and separated by deeds. Chatsunior." "I can't talk to you now, Thomas," I said at last. "I need time." "How much time?" I could hear the desperation in his voice. "The bank has only given us an extension until the end of the month. After that, we'll lose the house." It struck me that even now, after everything that had happened, he was still asking for help, as if the failed theft attempt was just a minor episode that could be forgotten and moved on. "It's not my problem," I replied, and continued toward the house. "Daddy!" he shouted after me, the same shout I'd heard from him as a child when I refused to play with him because of a work emergency. I didn't turn around. At home, I sat in a chair for a long time, looking out into the garden. The orange trees needed pruning. The paths needed weeding. I used to keep it tidy myself, but age was becoming more and more insistent. Maybe I should hire a gardener. My thoughts went back to Thomas, his words about despair and financial problems. Could I have seen the signs before? Probably. If I'd been a more attentive father, if we'd actually talked during those courtesy visits rather than exchanging platitudes. But even so, did his desperation justify his attempted deception? I remembered a case I'd handled years ago. A woman stole medication from a pharmacy for her sick child because she couldn't afford to buy it. Legally, she was guilty, but I imposed the lowest possible sentence, taking into account the circumstances. The law demanded justice, not revenge. But then it was a stranger. Now it's my own son. Can the same standard be applied? Should I be stricter or, on the contrary, more lenient? In the evening, I pulled out my old typewriter, another anachronism I didn't want to give up. In the age of computers and smartphones, the pounding of the Remington keys took me back to a time when the world seemed more orderly and understandable. I began to write, not a legal document, not a formal letter, just a stream of consciousness. Thoughts about betrayal, about family, about the meaning of the home in which I had lived most of my conscious life. Home is not walls, but memories, I wrote. But what if those memories are poisoned? Can one continue to live in a place where every corner reminds one of betrayal? I stopped, reread what I'd written and tore the sheet off. Too sentimental for a man of my mind. Too open for a judge used to hiding emotions behind a facade of impartiality. The phone rang again. This time I answered it. "This is Judge Holt." "Father, it was Thomas again." "Thank you for answering." "I'm listening," I repeated, keeping my tone neutral. "Wendy and I have decided to sell our house before the bank starts foreclosure proceedings," he said. "It would allow us to pay back at least some of our debts and get a fresh start." "A smart decision," I said. There was a pause. I could hear his breathing on the other end of the line. "We never would have finalized that plan," he said finally. "With your house, I wouldn't have been able to. Wendy came up with it, and I was weak and agreed." Again the finger pointing, and again my disappointment. "You have to take responsibility for your decisions, Thomas," I said. "You're an adult." "I know," he replied quietly. "Sherman and I am. We're selling the house. I'm looking for a new job. Wendy, too, will get by." "I'm glad to hear that." There was another pause, a longer one. "I'm sorry about everything," he said. "Not just with the house, about everything. With our relationship over the years." Something in his voice, a note of genuine regret, touched a string in my heart that I'd long forgotten existed. "I'm sorry too, son," I replied. "I'm sorry too." After the conversation, I sat staring at the phone for a long time. Something shifted inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a tiny step toward understanding. Thomas was my son, with all his faults, just as I was his father, with all mine. I spent the next few days in reflection and introspection, going through old photographs, reading diaries I'd kept over the years, trying to trace the path that had brought Thomas and I to this abyss of misunderstanding. I came across an entry from almost 30 years ago, when Thomas was about 8. Son asked to play baseball with him today, refused because of preparation for the Richardson hearing. He looked disappointed, but he has to understand. Work comes first. My father never played me, and I grew up a normal person. This entry, made in dry, almost clerical language, now hurt me with its churlishness. I grew up a normal person. What arrogance, and what a lie. I grew up a man who was incapable of showing emotion, who could not build close relationships, who put work before family, and I raised my son in my own image, just as emotionally closed, unable to talk openly about his problems, looking for workarounds instead of direct confrontation. Saturday morning, I hailed a cab and went to the bank. I spent almost 2 hours there talking to the manager and doing paperwork. Then I went to my lawyer and drew up some more documents. By evening, I felt tired, but also strangely relieved, as if I had shed a heavy weight I had been carrying for years. On Sunday, exactly 1 week after the dramatic disclosure, I heard the doorbell ring again. When I opened it, I saw Thomas, alone, without Wendy. He looked a little better than the last time I'd seen him, but still haggard. "Father," he began, "I know you've asked for time, but I have something important to tell you." I silently let him into the house. We walked into the living room and sat down, me in my usual chair, him on the couch where he usually sat during his courtesy visits. "I found a new job," he said, "in another city. Wendy and I will be moving in 2 weeks. I nodded, not showing surprise. "It's a good opportunity for a fresh start," he continued. We sold the house for less than we'd like, but enough to pay off some of our debts. The rest will pay off gradually." "That sounds like a reasonable plan," I said. "Yes," he rubbed his hands together nervously. "And, I wanted to apologize. A real apology. Not to make excuses, not to shift the blame, but just to say that I was sorry. What we did, what I did, is unforgivable. I understand if you don't want to see me again." I looked at my son. at the wrinkles around his eyes, at his graying temples, at the hands that looked so much like my own. In that moment, I saw in him not only a grown man who had made a mistake, but also that little boy who had once looked at me with adoration, believing that his father could solve any problem in the world. Panorama, I got the results from my attorney, I said, changing the subject. The revocation of the power of attorney is official. Thomas nodded, taking that information for granted. And I've amended the will, I continued, just like I said. There was no surprise or disappointment on his face, just a quiet acceptance of the consequences of his actions. It's your right, he said. I understand. Ani, I've also spoken to your bank, I added, with the manager who's handling your foreclosure case. Now his eyebrows rose upward in genuine surprise. You talked to our bank? Why? Because I'm your father, Thomas. No matter what. I stood up and walked over to the secretary, pulled out an envelope and held it out to my son. What is it? He asked, hesitating to take the envelope. Wait, it's your debt repayment papers to the bank, I answered. You've already sold the house, but the money is yours now, for a new beginning. Thomas looked at the envelope, then at me, his eyes filled with tears. Why? Was all he could squeeze out. After what we've done, because some things are more important than hurt and disappointment, I said. Because I've made just as many mistakes as you have as a son. And because I'm too old to spend my remaining years in bitterness and regret. Thomas accepted the envelope, his hands trembling slightly. I don't know what to say. Tell him you'll use this chance wisely, I said, that you'll be honest with yourself, with your wife, with me, that the next time you find yourself in a difficult position, you'll come to me directly instead of looking for a way around it. He nodded, unable to speak because of the emotions overwhelming him. One more thing, I added. The changes in the will I mentioned. I didn't disinherit you, as you probably thought. I only added the condition that the house cannot be sold for 10 years after my death. It has to stay in the family. It's my way of making sure that the memory of our family, however imperfect, is preserved. Thomas finally looked up at me, and I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't seen in a very long time. Not just gratitude or relief, but a glimmer of real love, the kind of unconditional love that should exist between parent and child, but that we'd both buried under years of misunderstandings and unspoken resentments. Thank you, Dad, he said quietly. I didn't respond, but for the first time in years, I allowed myself to put my hand on his shoulder, a simple gesture that said more than any words I could have spoken. Yesterday's conversation with Thomas had left me confused. On the one hand, I was relieved to be helping my son out of a financial hole, but on the other hand, doubts about the rightness of my decision lingered. Was I encouraging this kind of behavior? Had he gotten off too easy after such a betrayal? The morning was overcast. Gray clouds hung over Coral Springs, promising rain. I love this kind of weather. It's a good time to think, to contemplate life quietly with a cup of hot tea on the veranda. But today I had an appointment I had made 3 days ago. I dressed more formally than usual. Dark blue suit, white shirt, striped tie, and muted colors. My consistent style over a decades-long refereeing career. Dolph Pearson deserved that respect. We hadn't seen each other in almost 2 years, since his 70th birthday. Dolph was probably the only person I could call a true friend. We met in law school, but our paths diverged. I chose a judicial career. He became a successful corporate lawyer. However, our friendship had stood the test of time, distance, and differences in personality. I hailed a cab to the Blue Oyster Restaurant, a small but sophisticated establishment on the waterfront where Dolph and I traditionally met. He was already waiting for me, sitting at our usual table by the window overlooking the ocean. Despite his age, Dolph retained his military bearing and the sharp look in his blue eyes which always seemed to see right through people. Randall, you old grouch! He came up to give me a hug. You look better than I expected considering your message. And you're still as diplomatic as ever, I grinned, shaking his strong hand. We sat down, and the waiter brought the menu immediately. Dolph ordered a bottle of red wine, even though he knew I hadn't drunk alcohol in years. You need to relax, Rand, he said in response to my questioning look. From the sound of your voice on the phone, this is serious. I didn't argue. Dolph had always had a way of sensing the mood of the other person and acting accordingly, a quality I respected, even though I didn't possess it myself. When the appetizers arrived, shrimp for me and carpaccio for Dolph, I finally told him the whole story. The overheard conversation, the plan with the Rolls Royce, the dramatic revelation, and the subsequent conversation with my son. Dolph listened intently, not interrupting, only occasionally nodding or raising an eyebrow. When I finished, he took a sip of wine and looked out the window thoughtfully at the gray sky merging with the ocean on the horizon. "You know, Rand," he finally said, "the story's as old as time, the prodigal son and all that. Only in your case, the son hasn't even left yet, and you've already forgiven him." "I haven't forgiven him," I countered. "I helped him financially, but I didn't forgive the betrayal." Dolph grinned and shook his head. "You've always been stubborn, my friend. But let's face it, you didn't invite me here to tell me about your toughness. You want to hear that you did the right thing." I remained silent, realizing he was right. I did need confirmation that my helping Thomas wasn't a sign of weakness. "Shutter, I've known you for almost 50 years, Randall," Dolph continued. "And in all that time, you haven't changed. Always the judge even when it comes to your own son." "Do you think I should have ignored what he did?" I asked, feeling a defensive reaction rising in me. "He tried to sell my house behind my back, Dolph, to make me look incompetent." "No, of course not," Dolph gestured for me to stop. "Kwasaki, what Thomas did is unforgivable. But I want you to think, why did he do it? What drove your son, who no doubt knows of your generosity, to such a desperate move?" I frowned. The question had crossed my mind before, but I shrugged it off as an attempt to justify the unforgivable. "Financial problems," I answered. "He'd invested in some project that had fallen through. And you, a judge with almost 40 years of experience, a man who has seen hundreds of fraud and financial crime cases, you think that's reason enough for such a desperate move?" I remained silent, pondering his words. Dolph continued. "Do you know the details of this project? Have you been at all interested in your son's work in recent years?" He said something about digital security, a new system for banks. I answered uncertainly. "But we never discussed it in detail. He knows I don't know about modern technology." Dolph pulled a folded piece of paper from his inside jacket pocket and placed it on the table. "What is it?" I asked without touching the document. "I asked my assistant to make inquiries when you called and mentioned your son's name," Dolph answered. "It's an extract from the Register of Court Cases. Thomas Holt is the defendant in a lawsuit against the Orient Banking Group." I took the sheet and quickly looked through the contents. The amount of the suit made me shudder. $3 million. "That's impossible," I whispered. "Thomas had never dealt with that amount of money." "Exactly," Dolph nodded. "According to my assistant, your son was only a technician on the project. The main developer was a certain Axel Crawford, who disappeared immediately after the system failed. And Thomas, as the only available member of the team, took the fall." "Why didn't he tell me?" I set the document aside, feeling a heaviness growing inside. "I could have helped, found a good lawyer." "Why, Randall?" Dolph leaned forward. "Maybe because for the last 30 years you've been a judge instead of a father to him. Maybe he wasn't so much afraid of rejection as he was of your judgment." His words hit me harder than I'd expected. Memories flooded back. How I'd reprimanded 10-year-old Thomas for a bad math grade. How at his college graduation, I'd talked more about the need for financial independence than pride in his accomplishments. How at his wedding, I'd given him a speech that sounded more like a courtroom admonition than a fatherly blessing. "I always wanted the best for him," I said quietly. "I wanted him to grow up to be a strong, independent man." "I know," Dolph softened, "but children need more than strictness and high standards. They need to know that they are loved unconditionally, even when they make mistakes." We fell silent as the waiter brought the main courses, steak for Dolph and salmon for me. We ate in silence for a while, each absorbed in his own thoughts. "What do you recommend?" I finally asked, pushing the plate of fish away. "What should I do?" Dolph cut off a piece of steak and chewed thoughtfully before answering. "You've already taken the first step, Rand," he said. "You've helped him financially without requiring a humiliating apology or promise. That's more than most people in your position would have done. But is it enough?" "No," Dolph answered honestly. but the rest depends on what you want. If you really want to have a relationship with your son, you'll have to do something you've never done before. Show vulnerability. I cringed at the word. Vulnerability. All my life I'd avoided it, seeing it as a sign of weakness. A judge can't be vulnerable. He must be an unshakable rock against which waves of emotion and subjective opinions crash. I'm not sure I'm capable of that, I admitted. Then maybe you should do what you were originally thinking of doing, Dolph said. Change the will and distance yourself. Create clear boundaries. That's a fair choice too, Randall. Not every relationship can or should be saved. His words sounded like an echo of my own thoughts. Maybe some ties really are better severed than trying to mend over and over again. Auf one honor. You've always been ruthlessly straightforward, I grinned. And you've always valued honesty over comfort, Dolph parried. That's why I respect you. After lunch, we went to the embankment. It hadn't started to rain, but the air was damp and heavy. We walked slowly along the shore, two old men discussing the eternal questions of life, death, and forgiveness. Aha. You know, Dolph said, stopping and looking out at the ocean. My daughter didn't speak to me for almost 10 years after she divorced her mother. She thought I was a traitor who had destroyed the family. I knew of the story, but never heard the details from Dolph. When she finally came back into my life, I was too proud to admit how much I had suffered all those years, he continued. We rebuilt the relationship, but it never became truly intimate. Now she lives in Australia and I see my grandchildren every 2 years. If I could go back in time, he didn't finish the sentence, but I understood the meaning. Time always seems like a lot until it suddenly ends. I'll think about what you said, I said, shaking Dolph's hand in farewell at the entrance to the restaurant. Thank you for your candor. Don't take too long to decide, Rand, he replied. At our age, time is our most precious resource. When I got home, the first thing I did was check my answering machine. 3 new messages from Thomas, all thanking me for my financial help and asking me to call him back. I didn't bother to do that. I needed more time to think about the situation and make a final decision. I went up to my office and pulled the will folder out of the safe. The last time I had updated it was 5 years ago, after a minor heart attack made me think about the inevitable. The document was simple. The entire house and most of my savings went to Thomas, with small amounts to a few charities I'd supported over the years. Sitting down at my desk, I began writing notes for the new will. After much thought and a conversation with Dolph, I concluded that I couldn't disinherit my son completely. It would be a manifestation of the same excessive rigidity that had brought us to our current situation. But I also couldn't leave things as they were. That would be weakness. I decided to set up a trust that would pay Thomas a fixed sum each month, rather than give him the whole fortune at once. I would leave the house to him, but on the condition that it could not be sold for 10 years after my death. I will divert a significant portion of my savings to a scholarship fund for underprivileged law students, a cause I have always considered important. As I finished taking notes, I felt strangely relieved, as if making this decision had lifted some of the burden off my shoulders. Dolph was right. Not every relationship can or should be saved. Sometimes the best thing to do is to set clear boundaries and move on. I walked down to the living room and sat in my favorite chair, looking at the wall of pictures. My gaze stopped on a picture taken at Thomas's high school graduation. We stood side by side, not touching, both of us with strained smiles. Even then, there was a distance between us that neither of us knew how to bridge. The phone rang, interrupting my musings. I picked it up, expecting to hear Thomas's voice, but it was Arthur Price. Rand, I've been in touch with a friend of mine in banking, he said without preamble. Your son's situation is worse than we thought. A $3 million lawsuit is just the beginning. If the system they were developing really did have vulnerabilities like the bank claims, Thomas could face criminal prosecution as well. I listened, feeling my insides chill. It was one thing to be in financial trouble, and quite another to face the prospect of jail time. What can be done, I asked, trying to stay calm. I know a good corporate crime lawyer, Arthur replied. Sukarnanim, but Rand, it's going to be a long and expensive process, and there's no guarantee of success. After the conversation, I sat still for a long time, thinking about what I had heard. The situation was far more serious than I had realized. Thomas's desperation, which had pushed him to such a crazy step as selling my house, was now clear. He wasn't just losing his house, he was facing prison. But did that mean I should forgive the betrayal? Did any desperation justify the attempt to declare me incapacitated, to strip me not only of my property, but also of my dignity? No. Even in the most difficult situation, there are boundaries that must not be crossed. Thomas could have come to me for help, could have told me the truth, could have trusted me. Instead, he chose the path of deceit. I stood up and walked to the window. It was starting to rain outside, the large drops crashing against the glass, creating a soothing rhythm. I made a decision. I will help Thomas with a lawyer, pay his legal fees, do whatever I can to save him from jail. But I won't let him back into my life. Won't let him be vulnerable to betrayal again. It's not revenge or punishment, just a healthy distance between two adults who have hurt each other too much. Maybe someday, in time, we can build a new relationship based on honesty and mutual respect. But right now, I have to protect myself, my dignity, and the rest of the life I have left. I went back to the table and jotted down another note to my lawyer. Pay for a criminal defense specialist for Thomas, but do it anonymously through a trust. Let him get help without knowing it was from me. It will save us both the awkwardness of gratitude and expectation. Finished, I tucked the papers into a folder and closed it. Tomorrow, I'll take them to the lawyer and begin the process of changing the will. And today I'll just listen to the rain and remember the best moments of my life, of which, despite everything, there were many. 6 months have flown by. Florida autumn gave way to a mild winter, and then spring took over, coloring Coral Springs with the vibrant colors of blooming plants. My garden was transformed under the caring hands of Ernesto, the gardener I hired earlier in the year. The orange trees, pruned and fertilized, promised a good harvest, and the new rose bushes along the pathway were pleasing to the eye with their grace. I sat on the veranda, watching Ernesto methodically trim the hedges. His measured movements were soothing, reminding me that there was order and predictability in the world. In recent months, I've learned to appreciate these moments of simple calm much more than I used to. After all the events with Thomas, my life had changed, not abruptly and dramatically, but gradually as a river changes course when it encounters an obstacle. I stopped being a prisoner of my own routine and opened myself up to new opportunities I had previously ignored. It all started with a law club, where I used to drop in once every few months, mostly to maintain professional contacts. Now I became a regular participant in the weekly meetings and even led a discussion group on constitutional law. It turned out that my experience and knowledge were still in demand, and some young lawyers were genuinely interested in my opinion on complex cases. It was there that I met Chloe Pemberton, a retired law professor, a woman my age with a sharp mind and an even sharper tongue. She was not afraid to argue with me, often making arguments that forced me to reconsider long-held beliefs. Our discussions often continued over coffee in the little cafe across the street from the club, and I was surprised to find myself looking forward to these intellectual duels. I rely too much on precedent, Randall," she said, stirring the sugar in her cappuccino. "Sometimes you have to look forward, not backward." "Without precedent, there's no stability in the law," I countered. "It's the foundation of our system." "Stability or stagnation?" Chloe parried, and we again plunged into a heated argument, forgetting about time. Chloe didn't become my romantic companion, as some of our colleagues in the club hinted. We were just friends bound by common interests and mutual respect. But her presence in my life made me realize how lonely I had been all those years, shut away in my home and my memories. Another significant change was my volunteer work at a local legal aid clinic for the poor. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I spent 3 hours counseling people who couldn't afford a lawyer. Their problems ranged from eviction, from rental housing to wrongful termination, from child custody disputes to misdemeanors. I found that I derived deep satisfaction from helping these people make sense of the legal maze. There was no room for abstract reasoning or complex legal theories, only concrete problems requiring practical solutions. And seeing the relief on the faces of those who finally understood their rights and options was a reward I had not experienced even in the most successful days of my judicial career. I tried to think of Thomas as little as possible. Through Arthur Price, I learned that the attorney I had hired had succeeded in getting the amount of the lawsuit significantly reduced and avoided criminal prosecution. Thomas and Wendy moved to Charleston, South Carolina, where he found a new job with a small technology company. They called occasionally, mostly on holidays or my birthday, but the conversations were short and formal. I didn't ask about the details of their lives. They weren't interested in mine. Yet despite this distance, I couldn't completely cut my son out of my life. From time to time, I sent him small amounts of money, not significant enough to create a dependency, but enough to help with unexpected expenses. I never mentioned these transfers in our rare conversations, and he never thanked me for them. It was our unspoken pact: help without obligation, care without attachment. One spring day, as I was working in the garden with Ernesto, helping him transplant new flowers, another hobby I had discovered, the phone rang. It was Tomas, and his voice sounded unusually excited. "Father, I'll be in Miami next week," he said without preamble. "A 3-day business trip. I was thinking maybe we could get together." I didn't answer right away, mulling over his suggestion. We hadn't seen each other in person since the day I'd exposed his plan to sell the house. Was I prepared for such a meeting? And more importantly, was it necessary? "Why?" I finally asked. "Yeah, I think we need to talk," he said. "In person, not over the phone." I agreed to meet him at the Primorsky restaurant, a neutral location far enough from both my home and the place where his conference was to be held. We set a time, 6 p.m. on a Wednesday, in the middle of his business trip. Not too early so as not to create the expectation of a long conversation, and not too late so as to be able to leave if the conversation went wrong. On the appointed day, I arrived by cab 15 minutes before the agreed time, a habit of punctuality I had not gotten rid of even in retirement. The restaurant was elegant, but not pretentious, with a spacious terrace overlooking the ocean. I chose a table in the corner, where I had a good view but where we wouldn't be disturbed by other diners. Thomas showed up at 6 sharp, another trait he'd inherited from me. He looked better than the last time we'd seen him, trim, tanned, and wearing a light gray suit that fit his figure well. In his eyes, however, I saw a wariness and uncertainty that even his professional smile couldn't hide. "Father," he held out his hand to shake, and I did the same, a formal gesture that emphasized the distance between us. "Thomas," I nodded. "You look well." "Thank you. You too," he sat down across from me. "I hear you've taken up gardening." I was surprised. He could only have gotten that information from Arthur. "Yes, I found a new hobby in my old age," I said, not asking about the source of his information. The waiter brought the menu, and we ordered scallops for me, steak for Thomas. We discussed neutral topics for a while: the weather in Florida compared to South Carolina, his impressions of the conference, the latest news from the legal world. The usual conversation between a father and son who have nothing to say to each other, but are too polite to sit in silence. When the main courses arrived, Thomas finally got to the point. "I know about the money you're sending me," he said, looking me straight in the eye, "and about the lawyer you hired." I continued eating my scallops in silence. There was no point in denying the obvious. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "I didn't see the need," I answered. "Help doesn't require acknowledgement." "But I'd like to thank you," Thomas insisted. "Without that lawyer, I could have gone to jail. He literally saved my career, and maybe my life." "You're my son," I said simply. "No matter what." Thomas lowered his gaze to his plate. "I don't deserve this," he said quietly, "after what I've done." "It's not about what you do or don't deserve," I interrupted him. "It's about who I am and who I want to be. And I don't want to be the man who refuses to help his own child, even when he's made a mistake." "Mistake?" Thomas grinned bitterly. "What I did was far worse than a mistake. It was a betrayal." I didn't argue with his definition. He was right. "Sever, whatever you call it, it's in the past," I said. "I made the choice to help you, and I don't regret it. But that doesn't mean things are back to the way they were between us." "I understand," Thomas nodded, "and I'm not asking for total forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I realize the depth of my offense and that I'm truly sorry for it." There was a sincerity in his voice that I hadn't heard in a long time. Perhaps the hardships he had gone through had really changed him, made him grow up and reevaluate his priorities. "How's your new job?" I asked, changing the subject. "Good," he replied with a slight smile. "The company is small but stable. I am now more involved in training than in development. Turns out I like to pass on knowledge to others. And Wendy? She found a position at a local PR agency, not as prestigious as her old job, but she likes the quieter pace. We've, uh, we've been rethinking a lot of things since then. I nodded, not commenting. I wasn't interested in her and Wendy's rethinking, only that my son seemed to have finally found a path he felt comfortable on. How about you? He asked. I hear you've become more involved in the community. Yes, I've discovered new opportunities, and I replied. I'm volunteering at the legal clinic, a discussion group at the club, gardening. It turns out that in retirement, life is just beginning. We both smiled, the first genuine smile together in a long time. We ate dessert in a more comfortable atmosphere, discussing books we'd recently read, movies we'd seen. I learned that Thomas had begun to take an interest in Civil War history, a fascination he had acquired since moving to South Carolina. I told him about my recent trip to Key West, the first real trip in years, organized by Chloe for a group of law club members. When the waiter brought the bill, Thomas insisted on paying. Let me at least have this, Father, he said, taking out a credit card. I know it's a small thing compared to what you've done for me, but still, I didn't object, realizing that it was a symbolic gesture for him, a way to show that he was on his feet and could take responsibility. We walked out of the restaurant together, stopping on the sidewalk in front of the entrance. The sun was almost setting, coloring the sky and ocean in shades of purple and gold. The moment was beautiful and a little solemn, as if nature itself was setting the stage for our conversation. I don't know if we'll ever be able to fully repair our relationship, Thomas said, looking out at the sunset. But I want you to know that I'm grateful for everything you've done, and for what you've taught me, even if I haven't always followed your lessons. I looked at my son, a grown man who had survived a fall and found the strength to get back up. Maybe it was my fault too, the toughness I'd shown him since he was a child. Maybe it had given him an inner core that helped him not to break completely. Betrayal cannot be forgotten, Thomas, I said quietly. Trust once broken is hard to rebuild. But you are my son, and no one can change that. Not your mistakes, not mine. I held out my hand and he shook it firmly. Then after a second's hesitation, we hugged. Briefly but sincerely. Call sometimes, I said, pulling back. Not just on holidays. I will, he nodded. And maybe someday you and Wendy will. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, I interrupted him. One step at a time. We went our separate ways, he to his rental car, I to the cab that was waiting for me in the parking lot. Looking out the back window as his figure receded, I had a strange feeling. Not quite peace, but something close to it. Acceptance was probably the most appropriate word. At home, I sat on the veranda, enjoying the warm evening and the scent of the orange blossom trees. Tomorrow I had a busy day ahead of me. Consultations at the law center in the morning, a discussion group meeting in the afternoon, and dinner with Chloe and a few other colleagues in the evening. Life went on, full of new opportunities and connections. I hadn't forgiven Thomas completely and doubted I ever would. Some wounds are too deep to heal without scars, but I opened the door to the possibility of a new relationship. Not the one we had before, based on a sense of obligation and underlying disappointment, but a new one built on mutual respect and acceptance of who we had become. My home was still my fortress, a place where I felt safe and at peace. But now it wasn't just a house of memories of the past, but a place full of new plans and ideas. Every morning I woke up with a sense of purpose and anticipation for the day, a feeling I hadn't experienced even in the best years of my career. My son's betrayal was the catalyst for change in my life. Painful, but perhaps necessary. It forced me to step out of my comfort zone, open myself up to new people and opportunities, and rethink my values and priorities. I didn't know what the future would bring. Not for me, not for Thomas, not for our relationship. But for the first time in a long time, I was looking forward with interest rather than apathy. And that in itself was a victory not over my son, not over circumstances, but over my own fears and limitations. The garden seemed especially beautiful at dusk, the shadows softening the outlines and the first stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. I thought about planting new roses in the fall, and perhaps a small herb garden. Ernesto had already prepared a plot for that. I imagined picking fresh mint for tea and basil for the pasta I had recently learned to make at a cooking class for seniors. Life went on, unpredictable and amazing. And I, Randall Holt, former federal judge and father of Thomas Holt, was ready to accept whatever it offered with an open heart and a clear mind.